Hey everyone, I'm out here in the garage with the Acura RL, and I think you've seen the lead up to this video. This is the video that I've been putting off for a while, and that's replacing the rear struts on the Acura RL. So stay tuned. So yes, it's true. We are going to be doing the rear struts in the Acura RL today. So I have several videos you're going to want to follow to get to the point where you can actually replace the struts. The first one I would say would be removing the rear seat. So I'll put a link to that video. You can check it out. Also, you're going to have to remove the rear speakers to get the struts out. So I'll put a link to that video. You can check that out. And then lastly, the video you'll want to check out is jacking up the rear end of the car. So with all that done, it should be at this point where you can actually remove the struts from the car. So we're going to fast forward and get working on that process. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the lug nuts with the 19mm deep socket. Okay, so I can get access to the strut bolts at the top here. I need to remove this cover for the speaker, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off. Those are 3 10mm. Alright, so then there's a rubber cap on top of the strut. I'm just going to go ahead and pull that off. Set that aside. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and jack up the strut a little bit to compress it. Start with that right there. That's good enough. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the 3 14mm strut nuts. And again, be careful of the glass back here. Alright, so there is a 17mm bolt down here that needs to be removed, and I'm going to show you a picture, but the angle on this thing, the bracket right here that the bolt goes through, and then it also goes through this damper, the angle on that is a little strange, and so I had a little trouble on the other side. I'm not sure if that's true on all RLs or if I just have some sort of suspension damage back here, but it is odd to me, and so I had a little bit of trouble getting it back in, and also taking it out. So I'm going to go ahead, first of all, because I want to have a little bit of space to work with, I'm going to take the brake caliper off so I can get the brake line out of the way and then proceed from there. So that is a 12mm. There's 2 of them. Take the caliper off. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and remove this 17mm back here. Alright, so that's a little bit stuck in there. That's what happened on the other side too. You can try with the pry bar to lift up on the damper. There we go. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and get this out of here. Pry bar is probably going to be the best tool to use to get this out. There we go. Ooh, that came down quick. That's not what I intended to do, but it came out, so here we go. So best thing would be to hold my hand up there while I'm trying to pry, but I was trying to pry with, I was concentrating on prying it out, and it came down. So there's our strut. Alright, so I've got the strut and the jaw horse, and I cleaned it off a little bit. It was really dirty, so I took it outside and just brushed it off a little. And then I'm going to pull these plastic covers off. That one's tucked underneath there. So that one may have to come off later. And then this one down here, pull that off. Okay, and before I do anything, as we talked about in the front strut video, I want to line up the end of the coil spring here with the top mount. So I usually just make sure this is nice and plumb, so I have a level that I check it with. So I have my level right up against there. So there we go. Then I grab a 2-foot level and I just make a mark. By using the end of the coil spring, I'll make a mark up here on the strut mount. Alright, so we've got a mark right there. So I've got 6 coils here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same thing on this side. That should be good enough. Let's cinch this down by hand first. And once again, we want to make sure that the compressors are 180 degrees opposed to each other. And keep them that way throughout the whole procedure. Oh, got this one upside down. Again, the hex end goes on the bottom. Put that on there. Okay, let's put our locking safety pins in place. Alright, and then now we're ready to go. So again, I'm using the long handled ratchet with the 19mm socket. I don't like to use impacts on these, so that's why I use this instead. And for Honda springs, you don't really need to use an impact on these. They're really pretty quick and simple. Turns it off. Yep, that's turning now. I think we might be okay. I'm going to give it a little more pressure here, and I think we're good. Yep, I think that's about it. Tighten this one a little more, make it even. Alright, so once again we have a hex key, 5mm, and then our 14mm ratcheting wrench. Just go ahead and slide this on like that. And pull in opposite directions. There we go. Alright, so as you're noticing there, I've got a little bit of a gap forming, so that is good. So we are free to go ahead and take the nut off now. Okay, so now we can remove this washer there, take that off. We've got our strut mount. Go ahead and pull this off, and I'm going to take a look at it. Looks like the cushion's in good shape. And then we've got this big washer up here. Probably clean this off a little bit. Yeah, these rear struts get really dirty. So that's one thing you may have to do when you take everything off. Clean all the components before you put it back on. So now we can take our spring off. Just be very careful, lift up. Alright, good enough. I'm going to set that aside. Okay, now we'll take the boot off. And as I suspected, the bump stop has been damaged, so we're going to replace that. I heard a lot of rattling when I pulled the strut off, so that told me that the bump stop was not in good shape. Brass hammer. Take that off. Set that aside. Pull our bump stop off. Okay. That's trash. And that is about it. That's all the components we're going to salvage that we're going to transfer over to our new strut. Let's give this one a quick test to see if it's functioning correctly. It looks like it is, but it's kind of weird that the car is riding like it is. So let's go ahead and give this a test. That's almost too easy. So it goes back up. It looks like it went down really easy though. So that's probably not functioning as well as it should. On the other side, when I compressed the strut, I had to use the strength of He-Man. I'm probably dating myself there a little bit, but I had to use the strength of He-Man to really compress the strut. Alright, so here's our new strut. We're going to go with the Sachs again, just like we did on the front. Those seem to be working pretty well. The part number on this one for the rear is 316588. And the rear struts are the same on both sides. It's just the top mounts I think are a little bit different. So there it is. And we'll compare it to our old strut. Here's our old strut. They look pretty much the same. Alright, so before we put the components on, I want to make sure this strut is working. So I'm going to compress it a few times. Yeah, see, this one's got a little bit more fight to it, a little more resistance. Whereas that other one just had nothing. And these struts have about 212,000 miles on them, so I think they are original to the car. And so they're way past due. Yeah, that's much better. Much better resistance there. Okay, so I think this is ready to go. Now for the bump stops, since we have to replace our bump stop, you can buy the OEM Honda bump stops, but I'm actually going to use this one. This is KYB SB107. Go ahead and put this on. Brand new bump stop, that's nice. Slide that down. There we go. Okay. And now what we're going to do is go ahead and put our boot back on. And before we do that, we got to put this washer on first. It goes on. Again, you may want to clean this up a little bit. Get all the dirt off of it. Go ahead and put that on. And we want to make sure that this area right there lines up over here. Drop that down. Alright, that looks good. Now we'll put our spring back on. This end of the spring goes over here. Drop that down like that. There we go. Okay, and then we'll put our washer back on. Our big washer goes back up top. Then our strut mount, or top mount, right there. So there's our mark right there that I'm lining up with the end of the coil spring. So I'll make sure I get that lined up. Now you may have to adjust this later because as you uncoil the spring, as you uncompress the spring, this may be a little bit off, but you can always compress the spring a little bit, move this around, and then it'll line right back up for you. Let's go ahead and put our top washer on like that. And then I've got a brand new top nut that should come with your strut. Okay, so you hear that spinning. That's because it's spinning on the inside, so we need to use our hex key, 5mm once again. 14mm ratcheting wrench. Now, the torque spec on this nut is 22 foot-pounds, but because this thing is rotating, because the strut is rotating, I'm not going to be able to tighten it with a torque wrench, so I'm just going to tighten it by hand and just do it by feel. So if you have a special machine that can hold this in place, hold the top mount in place while you're doing that, then that's no big deal, but I don't have special equipment here that I can use. So it seemed on the front struts I didn't have that problem, but on these struts it seems like I'm going to have that issue. So we're going to do it by hand. Alright, so I feel resistance now. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up. That's probably pretty good. Alright, here we go. Okay, so this is ready to come off now. Undo the safety pins. There's one. Pull this one off. There we go. And from what I can tell, this is all lined up. It appears to be lined up, so it's ready to go back on the car. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put the strut back in. I had some issues on the other side because of the way the bracket is angled versus the strut bushing. So I'm hoping I don't run into those issues here. So let's give this a shot. Make sure I got this oriented correctly. And I'm just going to pass this over the brake rotor here. And get that in place back there. Lift it up. There really isn't much space to maneuver, so let's go ahead and pass it up through there for now. There we go. Wow. Okay, so at least I've got it somewhat started above. I'm going to put a nut on up above just to hold the strut up there. So do that. So we've got that secured up there. I'm not sure how well this is gonna go down here. So because right now the angle I'm looking at it's not correct. So I'll take a picture of this so you can see it, but it is not correct. Try a pry bar. See if that'll help us out. Okay. Alright, let me try a jack now under that. See if I can get it to go up a little bit. There's a little bit of pressure on there. See if I can get the screwdriver to do some more work here. Wow, that is tight. Not quite, it looks like. Yeah, I can get the bolt through on this side, but I can see on the other side it's still not lined up. That is so weird. That is strange. Alright, so the pry bar seems to be helping out a little bit. I should not have to do this. This is crazy. So tap on it some more. Let's try the ratchet now. So it looks like it's threading through now, finally. Okay, I'm not going to tighten this all the way down because I need to have the weight of the car on the strut before I can tighten this down. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put the nuts back in. I'm not going to tighten anything down just yet. So I've already got one nut in. I'm going to put the last two in. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is go ahead and jack up the car by the strut. And that'll put all the weight on the strut, and then I can tighten down the lower bolt and the 3 nuts up here. So let's do that next. Off the jack stand, I'm going to grab the torque wrench. The torque spec for the nuts up above here is 28 foot-pounds. Okay, 28 foot-pounds, and those are 14 millimeters. Okay. It's nice and tight. Now I'll work on the bolt underneath. That one is 76 foot-pounds. The last few things to do here are to reinstall the rubber strut cap, reinstall the speaker tray with the three 10mm bolts, then put the wheel back on and tighten the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds with the car on the ground. And that's it. Alright, so the rear struts in the RL are done. And as you saw, I had a little bit of difficulty getting the strut back in the bracket. I'm not sure exactly what's going on back there, if that's normal or not. I don't think it is. So anyone out there who may be changing struts on the RL, let me know if you run into the same problem I ran into. I'm going to check around to see if I notice anything else in the rear end of the car, but for now, the car seems to be riding pretty well. Now, I will say I did have to change out the tires on this car also, and I believe that's because the struts were so bad in the front and the rear that over time it just wore the tires out and it wore them unevenly. So when I put the struts on this car in the rear after I'd done the front struts, I was driving down the highway at around 50 miles an hour and the car was just shaking really badly. So I went to Discount Tire and I had them put some Michelin Premier ASs on this car. And I know the history of the Michelin Premiers, they typically have a little bit of issue with tread life, but in terms of ride quality and wet traction, they are incredible tires. I decided to just go ahead and take the chance and put those on the car. They may not last as long as I want, but the car drives so much smoother now than it did before. So hopefully this information on the strut replacement was helpful, and thanks for watching.